Chicago was drenched in rain that night, heavy, relentless, and cold enough to sink into the bones. Thunder cracked like angry growls over the skyline as lightning splintered across the glass towers. Jackson Whitmore leaned against the smooth leather of his black SUV, eyes fixed on the road ahead, his mind still tangled in the numbers and projections from the late-night client dinner he'd just left. Everything about Jackson screamed control, from the tailored charcoal coat hugging his frame to the perfect stubble that lined his sharp jaw. At just 30, he had built $1 million tech consultancy from nothing. Success was his drug. Routine, his sanctuary. Feelings? Complicated and inconvenient. He avoided them the way a sailor avoids storms. But that night, the storm wasn't just outside. It was about to knock directly on the walls he'd spent years building. As his car slowed near a nearly deserted bus stop, something caught his eye. A figure, small, curled in on itself like a wounded animal. The woman sat hunched on a bench cracked with rust, rainwater pooling beneath her. Her clothes were soaked through. Her tangled blonde hair clung to her neck like vines. Her arms wrapped tightly around her body, shivering with a stubbornness that looked almost noble. Jackson wouldn't have stopped. Not usually, not him. But something about her, maybe the way her emerald green eyes stared blankly into the distance, like she'd lost a war with the world and didn't have the strength to protest anymore, hit something raw inside him. He slowed. Then he stopped. Other passers-by hurried past her, shaking umbrellas and avoiding eye contact. A few glanced with pity but said nothing. She didn't ask for help, didn't beg, didn't flinch. Jackson lowered the passenger window. "Hey," he called softly. "You all right?" She didn't respond at first, just turned her face slightly, assessing him. Her jaw was tight, her lips pale. But behind her exhaustion, there was pride, almost defiance. "I'm fine," she said flatly, her voice hoarse. "You don't look fine," he said, still calm, still watching. "Get in. It's freezing out here." She hesitated, her shoulders tensed like she was waiting for a catch. But she didn't move. "I'm not offering money," he added, sensing her walls rise higher. "Just warmth. Maybe a coffee." She glanced at the rain, then at the SUV's heated interior. A war waged behind those tired eyes. Finally, with a breath that sounded like surrender, she rose, unsteady, slow, and opened the door. Rain clung to her skin like it refused to let go. She slid in, clutching her bag close, saying nothing, just breathing. "I'm Jackson," he offered after a moment, glancing at her. "Elena," she said quietly, not looking at him. "Elena Carter." The name lingered in the car like a ghost. They didn't speak much on the ride. She gave him no address. Only asked, "Can I stay somewhere warm tonight?" Just, just the night. Against every rule in his book, he nodded. His loft was everything hers wasn't. Sleek, modern, untouched by chaos. White marble floors, glass walls, minimal furniture. A reflection of the man who lived there. Sharp, clean, emotionally distant. But Elena didn't react. She didn't gape at the wealth or shrink under the designer lighting. She walked in quietly, dripping onto the hardwood, and sat silently on the edge of his pristine white couch, like she was afraid even to breathe too loud. Jackson brought her a dry towel, a blanket, and a cup of herbal tea, none of which she asked for, but all of which she accepted with a nod. She didn't say thank you, but she looked at him with eyes that spoke volumes. He stood in the kitchen pretending to check emails, but he wasn't reading a single word. Instead, his eyes kept drifting back to the girl curled up on his couch. Wrapped in a blanket, she looked smaller now. Her head rested against a cushion, lashes fluttering shut. Her lips parted slightly as sleep pulled her under. Not the restless sleep of someone who naps on park benches, but the kind that crashes in like a tide when your body finally believes it's safe. He should have felt awkward or cautious, but instead Jackson felt something strange, something warm, a flicker of protectiveness. She hadn't asked for sympathy. She hadn't tried to charm him. And yet, without even trying, she carved a place inside his heart. As the storm raged on outside, inside his loft was silent, except for the soft, steady sound of her breathing. And Jackson Whitmore, the man who lived by rules and logic, found himself unable to look away. He didn't know her story yet, didn't know her scars. But deep down, something told him this wasn't just a passing moment. This, whatever this was, had only just begun. The scent of fresh coffee wafted through the loft, waking Jackson more gently than any alarm ever had. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, painting golden patterns across the hardwood floors. He rubbed his eyes and stepped barefoot into the living room, expecting silence. Instead, he found her. Elena stood barefoot in the kitchen, wrapped in one of his oversized hoodies, her damp clothes folded neatly on the stool beside her. Her blonde hair, still damp at the ends, was now brushed and tucked behind her ears. The hoodie swallowed her petite frame, but somehow she looked beautiful. Effortlessly so. She moved with a calm certainty, pouring coffee into two mugs as if she belonged there, as if she'd always been there, like she had slipped through the cracks of his world and somehow made it warmer. Jackson cleared his throat and she looked up, startled at first, then slightly embarrassed. "I made coffee," she said almost too casually. "I hope that's okay. I didn't touch anything else." He took the mug she offered, fingers brushing lightly. "It's more than okay." On the marble kitchen island sat a folded piece of paper, a note. Her handwriting was neat, almost poetic. "Thank you for your kindness. I didn't want to leave without saying it. I'll be gone before you wake. Elena." Jackson glanced at it, then at her. "Running off already?" "I wasn't planning to stay," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "You were kind. That was enough." But it wasn't enough for him. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the bar stool across from his. "At least have breakfast." She hesitated, eyeing the door, then the food he was already laying out: sliced fruit, toast, eggs from his smart fridge. Eventually she sat, not because she needed it, but maybe because she didn't want to be alone just yet. They ate in quiet at first, the kind of quiet that felt oddly comforting. Jackson, who normally hated small talk, found himself wanting to hear her voice, to know what broke her and how she was still standing. "You didn't ask me anything last night," she finally said, dabbing at her lip with a napkin. "Why?" He looked at her. "Because you didn't owe me answers. And because I figured, if you wanted to talk, you would." She nodded slowly, lips twitching into a faint smile. A smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I left someone," she said after a moment. "Someone who thought hurting me meant loving me. I kept telling myself it would change, that I could fix him. But I was wrong." Jackson's jaw clenched subtly. He didn't interrupt. "I stayed too long, lost too much of myself. When I finally left, I didn't have anywhere to go. Couldn't go to my parents, they warned me. And I ignored them. You know how that goes." Jackson's heart pulled tight in his chest. Her words weren't just confessions. They were fragments. Broken glass, she offered carefully, hoping he wouldn't cut himself picking them up. "You don't owe me your story," he said gently. "But you deserve the truth," she murmured. "You let a stranger into your home. You should know why I looked like a ghost last night." He didn't speak. He just nodded, offering her space, respect, and something she hadn't been given in a long time: dignity. "I'm not asking for help," she said firmly. "I'm not a charity case. I just needed one safe night to breathe." Jackson leaned forward, blue eyes locking onto hers. "You don't look like someone who needs saving, Elena. You look like someone who's already saving herself. But even heroes get tired." She blinked as if the compliment stunned her more than anything else he could have said. "I can help," he added carefully. "If you want it, an apartment, a job, whatever you need." But she shook her head. "No money. No handouts," she whispered. "Just a ride. To a women's center I heard about. It's where I should be." He didn't argue. He simply nodded, because he saw the steel in her eyes, the same fire that let her walk away from a man who tried to break her. They drove in silence again, this time heavier, closer. When they reached the center, Elena turned to him before stepping out. "Thank you, Jackson, not just for the shelter, but for not making me feel small." "You never were," he said, and meant every word. She disappeared through the glass doors, swallowed by the soft beige walls and empathetic faces inside. That night, Jackson sat in the same spot she had the night before, the blanket still draped across the couch like a whisper of her presence. Her story played on repeat in his mind, Her voice, her courage, her refusal to break, it lingered, long after she was gone. And he knew, deep in his chest, beneath the logic and order he usually clung to, that their story wasn't over. Not even close. Jackson Whitmore returned to the world he had built with surgical precision. Sleek meetings in glass towers, tailored suits, and cocktail parties with laughter that never reached anyone's eyes. But nothing felt the same. Not the taste of expensive wine, not the deals that once thrilled him, not even the admiration he received effortlessly in rooms full of powerful people. Because she wasn't there. Elena's absence settled into his life like fog. Quiet, suffocating, inescapable. It crept into boardrooms and followed him home at night. She had been in his life for less than 24 hours, and yet it was as if she'd taken something with her when she left. Something he didn't know he was missing. He tried to dismiss it, blamed the weather, blamed stress. He distracted himself with flings, pretty women with perfect laughs and hollow souls. But none of them had Elena's fire. None of them could quiet the storm inside him. "You're distracted," his assistant Kira said one morning, handing him his fourth untouched espresso of the week. "That's the third meeting you've spaced out in. Are you okay?" He offered a half-hearted shrug, pretending to scroll through emails. "You're acting like a man chasing a ghost," she added softly. Jackson didn't deny it. Couldn't. Because in some cruel twist of fate, that's exactly what it felt like. Driven by longing and something deeper, guilt maybe, he began searching. Quietly. Discreetly. A name like Elena Carter wasn't uncommon, but her spirit was. So he scoured shelters, called outreach programs under fake aliases, visited community centers when his schedule allowed. And still, nothing. Days blurred into weeks. Hope began to fray at the edges. Then one gray afternoon, at a small outreach center tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop in the city's forgotten corridor, he saw her. She stood in the middle of a group of women, laughing gently as she guided their hands over old sewing machines. Her blonde hair was tied back in a messy braid, strands falling across her flushed cheeks. Children sat nearby, coloring with crayons as she sang quietly to one little girl resting on her lap. She looked radiant, alive in a way he had never seen before. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. But the moment she saw him, the light in her eyes dimmed. Her movements slowed. The sewing machine went quiet. She excused herself with a soft smile and walked over to him, her face unreadable. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice firm, careful. "I had to find you," he said, breath catching in his throat. "Elena, I can't stop thinking about you." She glanced away, jaw tight. "You don't owe me anything, Jackson. I'm not here because I owe you. I'm here because—" He exhaled, raking a hand through his hair. "Because I haven't been the same since the night you left. You changed something in me, and I don't know how to go back." Her fingers curled at her sides. She was torn. You could see it in the way she bit her lip, how her eyes flicked toward the kids still drawing behind her. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "This world, mine. It's not yours." "I don't care about worlds," Jackson replied, stepping closer. "I care about you." She didn't answer, just looked at him, heart thudding against walls she'd built long ago. He was the life she once dreamed of, and she was the girl he couldn't forget. But could two broken people meet again, without shattering each other? The first coffee she agreed to was a quiet affair, held at a small cafe tucked away from the bustle of the city. Elena sat across from him, her eyes still wary, as though she expected the ground to fall out from beneath her at any moment. Jackson didn't press her. He had learned the value of patience in his years of building his empire. But with Elena, it felt different. There was something raw about her, something fragile that made him want to tread lightly, even though the urge to rush forward gnawed at him. "I don't trust men like you," Elena had said bluntly, the words hanging between them. She wasn't unkind, but her gaze remained cautious. She wasn't just referring to Jackson's wealth. No, it was more than that. It was his power, the way people seemed to bend around him, the control he exuded. She had seen too much of it turn ugly to believe that a man like him could understand her. Jackson didn't try to argue, didn't challenge her distrust. Instead, he simply nodded. "I understand," he replied quietly, his voice sincere. He had spent years building a fortress around his heart. He couldn't blame her for doing the same. In the days that followed, they met often, but always in quiet, unassuming places. Elena had a grace that made her hard to forget, but also a wariness that kept people at arm's length. She spoke little about her past at first, and when she did, it was only in fragments, jagged pieces of a story she hadn't yet learned to tell without pain. Jackson, too, shared parts of his own story, about his emotionally distant parents, who had built their legacy on success but never taught him how to connect with those around him. He told her about the loneliness that had shadowed him in every achievement, about the hollow victories that had left him hungry for something he couldn't name. He spoke of nights when he lay awake, wondering if the price of his empire was more than he could bear. It was in these moments, the quiet exchanges, that Elena started to see him, not as the polished millionaire in his tailored suit, but as a man with his own wounds, his own vulnerabilities. For the first time, someone was listening, not to what she had survived, but to who she truly was. One evening, a week after their first meeting, Jackson invited Elena to take a walk with him along the riverfront. The path was lit with soft fairy lights, their glow reflecting off the water, casting a magic in the air that made everything feel just a little more tender. The world felt suspended in time. As they walked in silence side by side, Jackson glanced over at her. Her eyes were downcast, her fingers curled tightly around the strap of her purse. But then something shifted in the space between them. He reached out, tentative, unsure of how she would respond. But his hand hovered beside hers, and before he could pull away, she didn't move. He gently brushed her fingers with his, a quiet plea in the touch, and felt her breath catch, felt her hand warm against his. His pulse quickened as the world seemed to narrow to that moment. "We both carry wounds," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "But maybe we were meant to help each other heal." Elena didn't speak at first. She simply looked at their intertwined fingers, the way his hand held hers so softly, like he was afraid of breaking something fragile. She didn't know how to respond to such honesty, such a confession from a man like him. But then, in a moment that felt like both an invitation and a promise, she didn't pull her hand away. They walked in silence for a while, but the space between them felt different now. Not empty, but full, of something unspoken, something growing between them, unhurried, like a seed taking root in the darkness of their shared pain. Neither of them was ready to voice it, but they both felt it. This connection, delicate yet undeniable. And somewhere, deep inside, Elena couldn't help but wonder if, maybe after all the pain she had endured, there was room in her life for something new, something beautiful. For days, Elena allowed herself to believe, to hope, that maybe, just maybe, her past was truly behind her. The bruises of the past, the pain that had molded her into someone she didn't recognize, had begun to fade, and in its place, a fragile sense of peace blossomed. She had Jackson's presence, his steadying hand, and the warmth of his quiet support. It felt like the world was finally giving her a second chance. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. It came crashing down one night, unannounced, like the storm she had run from so many years ago. Elena arrived at Jackson's loft, her eyes wide with fear, her body trembling in a way she couldn't disguise. Her usual poise had shattered. She was no longer the composed, kind-hearted woman he had come to admire. She was a scared girl, fragile beneath the weight of terror. Jackson rushed to her, his hand immediately touching her arm, his brow furrowed in concern. "Elena, what's wrong?" She didn't answer at first. Her breathing labored, as if the air itself had been stolen from her lungs. Her eyes darted around, as though she expected Trevor to emerge from the shadows, his eyes filled with malice. She finally found her voice, shaking as she spoke. "He found me. Trevor found me," she whispered, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "He's been watching me. He said he'd ruin everything I've built. Everything. You don't understand. He's dangerous, Jackson. He's connected to people. Bad people. I can't go to the police. He'll destroy everything." Jackson's heart clenched. Trevor. He had never met the man, but the way Elena spoke of him, her voice tight, filled with raw fear, made Jackson's blood run cold. He couldn't imagine a man capable of causing this much anguish to someone so strong, someone he had grown to care for so deeply. Jackson's protective instincts flared, but he didn't argue. He could see that Elena wasn't asking for a fight. She wasn't asking for rescue or sympathy. She was asking for something more. For him to understand, and he did. But understanding wasn't enough. "Tell me what he did to you," Jackson demanded, his voice low, but filled with a quiet authority. "Tell me everything." As Elena explained, the pieces of her painful past fell into place. The manipulation, the lies, the threats Trevor had made against her. He wasn't just a man scorned, he was a predator, and Elena was his prey. The realization hit Jackson hard, his chest tightening in anger, but he couldn't show it. Not yet. He had to be the one to take control now. "Please, Jackson," Elena pleaded, her voice breaking. "I'm begging you. Don't go after him. He'll do worse. Just let me go. I'll leave Chicago. I'll disappear. I can't risk you getting hurt." But Jackson refused to back down. He had spent his life building a fortune and an empire on control, on knowing how to read people, how to influence outcomes. He wasn't about to let a man like Trevor destroy Elena's future or her peace of mind. She mattered too much, more than anything he had ever known. He stepped closer, gently cupping her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You're not alone in this," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. "I won't let him do this to you." And in that moment, something shifted. Elena saw it in his eyes, the quiet fury, the depth of his resolve. Jackson wasn't just a wealthy man used to getting his way. He was a man who would fight for what he cared about. He would fight for her. The next day, Jackson went to work. But this time, it wasn't for business deals or investment meetings. It was personal. His mind raced as he used his resources, his powerful network of contacts, his ability to influence people and gather information in ways others couldn't. His fingers typing furiously as he tracked down any lead on Trevor's criminal activities. There were whispers of financial fraud, shady business dealings, and records of harassment. Everything Jackson uncovered only added to the fire that burned inside him. Trevor wasn't just a man, he was a threat, and Jackson wasn't going to let him hurt Elena any longer. Hours later, Jackson stood before Elena again, his expression fierce. He had everything he needed, everything that would take Trevor down. "We're going to make sure he can never hurt you again," he told her, his voice full of promise. Elena stared at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had always been on her own, relying on her own strength to survive. But now, for the first time, she felt the weight of Jackson's loyalty, his unwavering commitment. He was ready to risk everything for her. And for the first time in a long time, Elena didn't feel so alone. Jackson's efforts were relentless. He didn't sleep, didn't stop. Every morning he was at his desk, combing through documents, tracing connections, finding clues that would bring Trevor's empire crashing down. His wealth and power, which had once been tools to build an empire, were now weapons in a war he'd never expected to fight. One for Elena's safety, her peace, and for a future he didn't know he wanted until she came into his life. He spent hours on the phone with legal experts, private investigators, and his network of trusted contacts. They all knew Trevor, knew his reputation, how his connections to shady underworld figures gave him a shield of power that seemed impenetrable. But Jackson wasn't afraid of that. He had his own strength. And the more he uncovered, the more he saw how far Trevor had gone to manipulate the system for his own benefit. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. When he finally had it, the smoking gun, the evidence of Trevor's darkest dealings, he could feel the weight of it in his chest. This was it. This was the moment he would end the torment Trevor had brought upon Elena. But just as he was about to make the call, something unexpected happened. He walked into his office one morning to find Elena standing there, her gaze distant, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. There was a new tension in the air, an unspoken understanding that lingered between them. Jackson paused, his heart racing, sensing the shift in her energy. I can't keep running, Jackson," she said softly, her voice heavy with emotion. "You've done so much for me, but I can't keep asking you to fight my battles. I don't want to drag you into this mess. Her words hit him like a punch. His jaw tightened, and he moved toward her, his eyes searching her face for any sign of uncertainty. Elena, you're not dragging me anywhere. This is not your battle alone. This is our fight, and I'm not going to let you carry this weight by yourself. But Elena shook her head, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders like a veil. She looked vulnerable, a side of her Jackson hadn't seen before. I don't know how to trust anymore, she whispered, the cracks in her voice revealing the depth of her pain. You've been nothing but kind to me, but Trevor, he's right. I don't deserve someone like you. I don't deserve to be saved. Her words stung. They pierced him deeper than any physical wound ever could. She didn't believe in herself. She didn't see the woman he had come to know. Strong, resilient, capable of so much more than she realized. She only saw the woman who had been broken by her past, and Jackson couldn't stand that. Without thinking, he reached for her, pulling her into his arms. She tensed at first, but then her body softened, and she leaned into him, seeking solace in the strength of his embrace. The moment hung in the air between them, raw and real, like the calm before the storm. Elena, Jackson said, his voice a low murmur, don't ever think you're not worth saving. You are so much more than you realize. And if you let me, I'll prove that to you every day. She didn't speak for a long time. And when she finally pulled away, her eyes were full of unshed tears. But there was a new light in them, a flicker of hope. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what the future held. But in that moment, she realized something that had been missing for so long. Maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of love, of protection, of being cared for without strings attached. Jackson's heart pounded in his chest as she reached up and touched his cheek, her fingers trembling slightly. What do we do now? She asked, her voice soft, yet filled with determination. Jackson smiled, the weight of the battle ahead still looming over them, but the fire in his chest burned brighter than ever. Now, he said, his voice unwavering, we fight, together. And for the first time, Elena felt a sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone anymore. The gala sparkled with soft golden lights reflecting off crystal chandeliers. Guests mingled in elegance, sipping champagne and donating generously. But for Elena, the night wasn't about glamour. It was about full-circle moments. Just months ago, she'd stood on the edge of survival. Now she stood as a beacon for others, dressed in confidence and grace. Jackson stayed close to her side, his presence both grounding and steady. He had always let her lead, never stealing the spotlight, never acting like her savior. Tonight was no different. At least, that's what she thought. Elena took the stage with quiet power. Her speech was raw, beautiful, and full of conviction. We are not the things that happen to us, she said, voice trembling but proud. We are who we choose to become after. Her words hung in the air like a promise, and the crowd erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. As she stepped down, expecting the evening to continue with silent pride, she was stunned to see Jackson walking toward the stage. The murmurs grew. Elena's eyes widened. What is he doing? She whispered under her breath. Jackson reached the microphone and paused. The room fell quiet. I wasn't planning to speak, he began, voice steady but full of emotion. But some moments don't wait for plans. He turned to Elena, his blue eyes locked on hers. The night I met you, I thought I was giving you shelter. I didn't realize you were the one who would give my life meaning. Gasps echoed. Elena froze, hand rising to her mouth as her eyes filled with tears. I watched you rebuild yourself piece by piece, he continued, his voice cracking. And I've never loved anything more fiercely than I love the woman you've become. Then in front of everyone, Jackson slowly knelt. The room collectively held its breath. Elena Carter, he said, reaching into his pocket and revealing a simple but breathtaking ring. Will you build a new life with me? Not as a fairy tale, but something real, something we'll write together, scarred, beautiful, and true. Tears streamed down her cheeks as the entire room leaned in. Yes, she whispered at first, then louder, stronger. Yes, you gave me one night when I had nothing, and I'll give you forever. Cheers broke out. Strangers applauded. Some wept. Jackson stood and pulled her into his arms, their kiss tender, unshaken by the world watching. That night, under glittering lights and 100 loving eyes, the woman who once had no place to go finally found home. Not in a building, but in him, and in love that was earned, not given, built, not borrowed, forever.